Robert Pattinson has spent the last decade doing something most movie stars rarely do. Every time you think you've figured out what kind of actor he is, he chooses something completely different. Edward Cullen, Ray, Connie Nicholas, Thomas Howard, Bruce Wayne, Mickey 17. These characters don't just look different. They speak differently, move differently, think differently, and demand completely different things from the actor playing them. And that's what makes Pattinson's career so interesting, because he doesn't seem to chase roles. He chases challenges. But to understand that, you have to go back to the role that made him famous. Twilight. When Twilight arrived, Robert Pattinson wasn't just getting a successful movie role, he was becoming a phenomenon. Edward Cullen turned him into one of the most recognizable young actors on the planet. The franchise had an enormous fan base, and Pattinson became inseparable from the image of the mysterious, beautiful, tortured vampire. Commercially, it was almost impossible to ask for more. Artistically, though, it was a very different story. Edward was a huge character culturally, but he didn't always give Pattinson the kind of dramatic territory that could show the full extent of what he was capable of. And yet, if you actually watch Pattinson in those films, there are little flashes, a strange expression, a bit of dry humor, a moment of vulnerability, a sudden shift in intensity. You could see that there was something underneath the Edward Cullen persona, and Pattinson seemed to know it too. He eventually made it clear that he didn't want to spend the rest of his life being known as the Twilight Boy. He wanted to explore himself, take different kinds of roles, and find out what else he could do.
Generally, people who haven't seen it, and they're like all judgmental and stuff, and cynical people. But I think I am a judgmental and cynical person who would just mindlessly hate it without ever having seen anything. So like,
what is the one word that would describe what this ride has been like for you?
Ridiculous. A lot of stuff in the Twilight world that doesn't make any sense. It's like, why are they still going to high school? Like up until last year, they're 100 years old.
And interestingly, this wasn't even his first experience inside a massive franchise. Before Twilight, he had played Cedric Diggory in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. He didn't have enough screen time there to show the actor he would eventually become, but there was already a certain presence to him. It was an early glimpse of a young actor who could stand out inside a gigantic production. Then Twilight made him famous, and now he had to figure out how to become an actor again. The first serious step was the Rover. Ray couldn't have been further from Edward Cullen. He was awkward, vulnerable, physically strange, socially uncomfortable, and nothing about him was designed to preserve Pattinson's image as a glamorous young movie star. Even his voice became part of the transformation.
Why not feel comfortable with someone and sit, not talk to them?
Pattinson didn't simply show up and play Ray as Robert Pattinson, but different. He worked on the character's speech, movement, posture, and nervous physicality to create someone who felt like he belonged to an entirely different world. And that's what makes the Rover important. It wasn't the finished product. It was the experiment. Pattinson was testing how completely he could dismantle the image that Twilight had created for him. But looking different from Edward Cullen was only the beginning. The next challenge would be much harder. Could he make you care about a man who was selfish, reckless, manipulative, and morally difficult to like? Because with Good Time, Robert Pattinson wasn't just going to play a different character. He was going to show us a completely different actor. Good Time is where the experiment becomes a real transformation. Connie Nicholas is not a misunderstood hero. He is selfish, reckless, manipulative, and constantly making terrible decisions. He pulls his brother Nick into a robbery. The plan falls apart. Nick gets arrested, and Connie spends the rest of the night trying to get him out. So even when Connie is doing something that looks selfless, there's an uncomfortable truth underneath it. He's trying to save the person he helped put in danger. That contradiction is exactly what makes the character so difficult. And Pattinson never tries to make Connie cool. He makes him restless. Watch the way he moves through the movie. Connie is constantly calculating, lying, improvising, running, talking, looking around, changing his story. Even when he's standing still, Pattinson makes him feel like his mind is moving 100 miles an hour. His voice is part of it. His eyes are part of it. His posture is part of it. Even the way he suddenly switches from confidence to panic tells you exactly who Connie is. And that's the big difference from the Rover. In the Rover, Pattinson was proving that he could look and sound completely different from Edward Cullen. In Good Time, he's proving that he can inhabit a completely different psychology. Pattinson put real effort into getting inside Connie's world.
I think just in the movie, he's, I think under normal circumstances, he wouldn't be communicating with any of the people he communicates with. I think he finds it like almost like disgusting to talk to anyone. He's a loner, and And so yeah, it's kind of interesting playing someone who's sort of, I don't know, I mean, he's just a very unique character.
Was it something he really wanted to do, be in a different light, experiment with a role that he never tapped?
That was the first thing he said to me when he reached out to me, and he said, I want to work with you guys. I don't care what you're doing next. I want to be a part of it. And I think that he saw something in our kind of almost stubborn approach to filmmaking, and our obsession with real life fabric. And I think he just said, you know what, I want to experiment with this. I want to see how far I can take it.
The Safdies saw that he wasn't interested in protecting his movie star image. He was willing to look desperate. He was willing to look pathetic. Most stars learn to control their image. Pattinson was becoming interesting by doing the opposite. He was letting the character destroy his image. That's why Good Time became such an important turning point. People weren't simply saying, Robert Pattinson is good outside Twilight. They were starting to ask a much more interesting question. How good can Robert Pattinson actually become? And instead of answering that question with another safe role, he pushed himself even further. The Lighthouse. If Good Time was about becoming someone morally ugly, The Lighthouse was about seeing how far Pattinson could push the performance itself. This time, there was nowhere to hide behind realism. Robert Eggers created this strange, claustrophobic world where everything feels heightened. The dialogue, the imagery, the atmosphere, even the behavior of the characters. And Pattinson responds by turning the volume up. The accent, the voice, the physicality, the rage, the paranoia. He doesn't seem afraid of looking ridiculous, and that's important.
Your foul, rotten-toothed, smelly old mouth. You damn... I ain't finished yet!
Because an actor obsessed with maintaining a glamorous image would probably pull back at some point. Pattinson keeps going. He gets louder, stranger, more theatrical, more physically unrestrained, and Willem Dafoe gives him the perfect opponent. Their performances constantly push against each other, until the movie starts feeling less like two actors delivering lines, and more like two people trying to psychologically destroy one another. Pattinson later talked about the freedom of going into that manic space with Dafoe, and you can feel that freedom in the performance. This is the point where his transformation becomes impossible to dismiss as a temporary phase. Good Time proved he could disappear into a character. The Lighthouse proved he was willing to push that ability toward its limit. And somehow, the next challenge was going to be completely different. Because Pattinson wasn't trying to abandon Hollywood. He was learning how to move between worlds. After the intimate chaos of Good Time and The Lighthouse, he stepped into Christopher Nolan's Tenet, a massive blockbuster that required a completely different kind of control. Here, he couldn't simply overwhelm the screen with eccentricity. He had to work within Nolan's machinery and still make Neil feel charismatic, mysterious, and effortlessly capable. It was important. Now Pattinson had shown that he could disappear, he could explode, and now he could operate at scale. But that was only preparing him for the biggest challenge yet. Pattinson had spent years trying to escape one gigantic pop culture identity. Now he was about to voluntarily step into another. Batman, a role with decades of history behind it. Enormous audience expectations waiting for him, and one of the most intimidating recent interpretations already sitting in the shadow of Christian Bale. And this time, the question wasn't whether he could wear the suit or carry another blockbuster. It was whether Robert Pattinson could take one of the most recognizable characters in popular culture and make audiences see something they hadn't seen before. The Batman was the perfect challenge for Robert Pattinson, because by this point, he had already spent years proving that he could disappear into strange characters. But Batman was different. You can't reinvent a character like Batman in a vacuum. This character had already been defined by Michael Keaton, Christian Bale, and Ben Affleck. And after Christopher Nolan's trilogy, audiences already had an iconic, grounded Batman. So Pattinson wasn't walking into an empty role. He was walking into a character people already had very strong opinions about. This time, he wasn't trying to run away from the size of the character. He was trying to redefine it. Matt Reeves didn't want another polished, fully formed superhero. He wanted a younger Batman who was still figuring himself out. Someone darker, more obsessive, more damaged, and more grounded in the psychology of Bruce Wayne. His Bruce Wayne doesn't feel like a billionaire who happens to dress up as Batman. He feels like a damaged young man who has become so obsessed with Batman that Bruce Wayne almost disappears underneath it. Look at the way he moves. There's a heaviness to him. He's not elegant. He's not effortlessly confident. Even when he enters a room as Bruce Wayne, he seems uncomfortable being Bruce Wayne. And then he puts on the suit. Suddenly, everything changes. His posture becomes heavier, his movements become deliberate, his voice becomes controlled and intimidating. But the most interesting part is that Batman doesn't make him look powerful in the conventional superhero sense. He looks exhausted. He looks angry. He looks like someone who has spent years turning grief into a mission. That makes Pattinson's version feel less like a traditional superhero and more like a man who doesn't know what else to do with his pain. Good Time had taught him how to play desperation. The Lighthouse had taught him how far he could push psychological intensity. Tenet had taught him how to function inside a massive blockbuster without losing his screen presence. Now he could combine all of those things. The result wasn't another copy of Batman. It was Pattinson's Batman. And that distinction matters, because the real achievement here isn't that a former Twilight star managed to play one of the biggest superheroes in the world. The achievement is that he entered another gigantic pop culture machine without allowing it to erase what made him interesting in the first place. Before the Batman, there was always a question hanging over Pattinson's career. Could this actor who had built so much credibility in unusual films actually carry a gigantic mainstream franchise? But the most interesting part is what he did next. Because after finally becoming Batman, Pattinson could have settled into the safest version of his career. He could have made another franchise, another handsome leading man role, another project designed to protect the image of Robert Pattinson, the movie star. Instead, he went in the opposite direction. He chose Mickey 17.
It's a horrendous story for Mickey. I mean, it's an absolutely horrendous life. It's just interesting having a hero who is incapable of seeing themselves as a hero.
A strange science fiction film from Bong Joon-ho, a role where he could play multiple versions of the same character. And suddenly, the challenge changed again. Could the actor who had just played one of the darkest versions of Batman also be ridiculous? Could he be awkward? Could he be funny? Could he play someone pathetic without worrying about looking cool? That is what makes the Batman feel less like the end of Pattinson's transformation and more like the moment he earned something much more valuable: freedom. He no longer had to prove that he could escape Twilight. He no longer had to prove that he could carry a blockbuster. He could simply ask the same question he had been asking since the Rover. What can I do next? And this is where Robert Pattinson's run gets even more interesting. Because after the Batman, he had already achieved something most actors spend their entire careers trying to achieve. He had the blockbuster. He had the iconic character. He had the critical credibility. He could have played it safe. Instead, he went in completely different directions again. Mickey 17 is a perfect example. After playing one of the darkest versions of Batman, Pattinson suddenly plays Mickey Barnes, an awkward, anxious, sometimes ridiculous man who keeps dying and being replaced. And then he has to play different versions of that same person. The challenge isn't about looking intimidating anymore. It's comedy, physicality, timing, voice, personality. He has to make Mickey 17 and Mickey 18 feel like different people while still making you believe they're connected. And the most important part is that Pattinson isn't afraid of looking ridiculous. That's something his career has increasingly allowed him to do. He doesn't need to protect the image of Robert Pattinson, the movie star, anymore. He can be strange. He can be pathetic. He can be funny. He can completely embarrass himself if the role asks him to. And then he does something different again. Die My Love strips away almost everything that made his biggest roles visually spectacular. There's no Batman mythology, no huge action set pieces, no elaborate sci-fi concept. The challenge becomes much quieter. It's about relationships, emotional tension, reactions, and what a person reveals through the way they respond to someone else. And that's another important part of Pattinson's evolution. His range isn't just about changing his appearance, voice, or physicality. Sometimes the challenge is seeing how much he can communicate without doing very much at all. Then comes the drama, another completely different kind of project. Here, he's playing Charlie, a man whose seemingly perfect engagement is thrown into chaos by an unexpected turn during his wedding week. Again, there isn't some giant character transformation to hide behind. The interest comes from discomfort, from reactions, from uncertainty, from watching an ordinary person deal with something that completely changes the emotional landscape around him. And what's fascinating is that Pattinson himself has described how different these projects felt. He finished Die My Love and immediately moved into the drama, which he said was insanely different from the film he'd just made. That almost perfectly summarizes his career. Insanely different. And then, somehow, the next challenge became another Christopher Nolan film, The Odyssey. This time, the scale is enormous. Nolan's epic was shot entirely with IMAX film cameras and released in 2026. But look at how different Pattinson's position is now. When Twilight became huge, he was trying to convince people that there was more to him than Edward Cullen. Now he's working with Christopher Nolan again, appearing in one of the biggest films of the year, while also moving between completely completely different filmmakers and genres. He doesn't need to announce that he's versatile anymore. His filmography has already done that for him, and the pattern isn't stopping. Primetime puts him in a completely different world again, with Pattinson starring as a crime investigating journalist in Lance Oppenheim's film about the era of To Catch a Predator. Then there's Dune, Part 3, where he'll play Skittily in Dune Saga. And that's why I don't think the most interesting thing about Robert Pattinson's career is that he escaped Twilight. That's only where the story begins. The real achievement is that he never replaced Edward Cullen with another box. He didn't become the indie actor. He didn't become the serious actor. He didn't become the Batman guy. He didn't become the franchise star. Every time he gets comfortable, he seems to look for another challenge. And when you put the entire journey together, it becomes pretty remarkable. Edward Cullen gave him fame. Ray gave him freedom. Connie gave him risk. Thomas Howard gave him the chance to push himself to the edge. Batman gave him the biggest mainstream test imaginable. Mickey gave him comedy and multiple personalities. And his newer projects keep demanding something different again. That's what makes this run so unusual. He's not simply collecting great roles. He's collecting different acting problems and finding a new way to solve each one. And maybe that's the reason Robert Pattinson has managed to stay so interesting for so long. He doesn't chase roles. He chases challenges. And after all these years, bro is still cooking on a different level. If you like the video and want more such actors' career analysis in depth, then consider subscribing. There are many such actors who deserves to be analyzed deeply.